Welcome to class. My name's Trevor, and I post D&D videos every week, generally on Wednesdays. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I used Wild Beyond the Witchlight in my homebrew D&D game. So far on this channel, I've done 2 videos on Wild Beyond the Witchlight, a first impressions video and a more player-focused video. But since then, I've actually been able to use elements from Wild Beyond the Witchlight in my home game, and it was significantly easier than I thought it was going to be. So I wanted to talk about that. My homebrew DMing style involves a lot of modifying inspirational source material. You might have noticed a lot of the shorts on this channel have to do with Magic the Gathering, and even like some of the books that I teach at school, I try to think about how I would run them in existing D&D campaigns or how I would turn them into D&D campaigns. Wild Beyond the Witchlight was really the first book that, adventure book, that I purchased that I could slot into an existing game this easily. Part of the reason for that is because my players happen to be in the Feywild, but it also, something just clicked, and I want to talk about how and what elements from Wild Beyond the Witchlight I've thrown into my games so far. I don't want this to turn into a campaign diary, because that's not the most important part. My players were traveling through the Feywild, and they came across, after rolling on an encounter table, a field of flowers. And this was inspired by Amador. I believe it's page 135 on Wild Beyond the Witchlight, this animated dandelion. And I was just blown away. The stat block was cool, the illustration just looked so whimsical, and I decided to add that to the encounter table. I used the idea of this character, but not all of the plot threads that were connected to it. Instead, this field of flowers was under this harsh sunlight. If my players walked through it without some sort of protection, then they would be burned, right? Like an actual sunburn. And this meant that they had to bargain with, which is obviously always dangerous in the Feywild, with Amador to try to get something to protect them. Now, my home games tend to be very comedic, and this game was really, really comedic. So they all ended up bargaining with Amador and getting sunglasses or parasols. And this whole situation came about because of just flipping through Wild Beyond the Witchlight and seeing this illustration of a dandy-looking dandelion and wanting to incorporate that in my game. And I am so glad that I did, because it really helped set the tone for this part of the Feywild adventure. After that, they made it through this area, they didn't get burned by the sunlight, they ended up taking a long rest. And I incorporated elements of the kind of unicorn puzzle from Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I'm not going to go into all the specifics from that. I don't want to spoil it either. But I saw a lot of those elements, and I was like the Feywild is perfect for a unicorn, but including that as some sort of puzzle and being able to gift them a boon when they solved it, or if they chose to participate in it, was incredible. And we also got to make a fun callback to the balance arc of the Adventure Zone with how I characterized the unicorn rather than using the character that's outlined in Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Being able to merge these different things helped me create a world that was more rich and enjoyable for my players to experience, but also very lighthearted and fun. It became this shared thing. After the long rest, my players woke up and they realized that they were surrounded by a Goblin Market. I had been planting seeds for this, and while they had been in the Feywild, I had been giving them currency in the form of bottle caps rather than in the form of gold, silver, or what have you. It just seemed more whimsical, and I knew that I wanted to include a Goblin Market in general. Now, Wild Beyond the Witchlight happened to have one, but in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, there were some specifics, but it was mostly just the candy, which I did include. I kept that in this Goblin Market. But I also pulled from elsewhere. There's the flax spun gifts table, and I made that an artificer that was at this Goblin Market. And one of my players, it was actually my wife, she asked if there were carnival games going on at this market. She did not know that this was part of Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but when she mentioned it, I didn't plan that. I thought that this was just going to be a market stall. But when she said, are there any games that I can play and use my bottle caps to buy tickets or buy entry into these games, my eyes went wide, and I'm like, well, of course there. And I just flipped to an earlier page in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and I saw some of the basic games, right? Not the more intricate ones, but the Almirage Ring Toss and the games like that. My players were able to experience these games and bargain with these bottle caps that they had, and it made this place feel so much more whimsical and so much more fun than I probably could have done on my own just as a homebrew DM. I mean, even just the fact that I was able to flip to an earlier part of the book and immediately had rules for how to run these carnival games was excellent. Now, I mean, like, I know that I probably could have planned these things out, but the fact that I didn't have to dedicate time to it, and I felt comfortable enough just building a puzzle from these random pieces in this book was an absolute blessing. And I think that's one of the big takeaways that I want to try to get across in this video, right? There is so much information out there when it comes to TTRPGs and D&D, and as a DM, you need to have the confidence to incorporate that as long as the tenor of it matches what your play group is looking for, right? I knew that my players would be okay, especially because we're in the Feywild, with a more lighthearted style situation, especially because our last game was a little bit more emotionally heavy. And I knew that, like, incorporating these elements from this book could fit for that, and I could make it work. I could make the pieces fit together in the way that I needed them to. And I really think that it ended up, we had a blast. It ended up being a really great night. And my use of the book didn't end quite there. There's one more thing that I want to talk about. Prior to entering the Feywild, my players have been chasing these hags, or I guess one particular hag, for a while, like from very early on in this campaign. And that hag, unfortunately for my players, has been able to reproduce, for lack of a better term, make new hags. And just by happenstance, there are new hag stat blocks in Wild Beyond the Witchlight. And if you've been a viewer of this channel for any length of time, you know that I love hags. And I was able to have my players like roll perception checks while they were at this Goblin Market, and they were hearing the names of these hags. And my players remembered that when the hag from earlier in the game, who I think was calling Granny Sadie, when she ran off, and before they entered the Feywild, they remembered that she had made new hags. That was known information. But now they have the names of these hags, and I'm able to use the like flavor and specifics of the hags in Wild Beyond the Witchlight to make these hags, and they're not just like green hags or anise hags or sea hags. There's something way more flavorful and way more specific that works really well for the situation that we're in. So now they're traveling and they're at the foot of this, like they're reaching the destination where they need to get to, and they know the enemies that they're about to face. And I had to do less work on my back end because I had this resource to use. This might seem like a weird idea for a video, but I really want to encourage you, especially if you're a homebrew DM, to look for inspiration everywhere. Now, obviously, like you can run this adventure as is, but having the confidence to tweak and steal and borrow is such an important thing. And I think that this book lends itself to that really, really well. And I wasn't sure about that when I first read it because the narrative seemed so honestly solid. Like it seemed so good. Everything seemed to fit together really well. But after bending it and fitting it into my own game, I am so glad that I bought this book. And I never thought that I would be using it in this way. Honestly, I thought that I'd maybe use the magic items that were listed, and maybe my players would want to play a fairy or a Heron at some point, and I'd have the adventure in case I wanted to run it for students in the future. I never thought that I would use it in the way that I did, and I'm so glad that I did. And it really speaks to like how I am as a DM, because my DMing philosophy is really about modifying and getting inspiration from wherever you can, but then having the faith in yourself to turn that into something that will fit for your table. And yes, it's beneficial that I've been playing with my play group for quite some time, but I think that this is one of the really big like benefits of D&D and tabletop RPGs. It's this sense of like community and collaboration that comes across from homebrewing and homebrewing from inspiration wherever we can find it. So I hope this video made sense. I hope it was valuable, and I hope you can see that inspiration wherever it might be, even in the most innocuous of places. If you want to subscribe to the channel, please do. I'd much appreciate it. I post D&D content weekly, and sometimes some of that content is also tied to Magic the Gathering. And if you want to like this video, or even leave a comment about the strangest place you may have found inspiration for D&D, I'd love to hear it. But as I always say, be safe. Make smart life choices.